The sky turned black on a Tuesday morning. Not the black of a normal eclipse or a storm cloud. This was the black of something so massive that it blocked out the sun entirely. Admiral Jiwoo Kim stood in the command center of Earth's main defense station, staring at the screens that showed the Galactic Collective's arrival. The ships were enormous, like floating mountains made of metal and technology that humans had never seen before. The sensors were going crazy with alerts. Red lights blinked everywhere. The computers were struggling to count how many enemy ships there were. Estimates kept changing. First 100 ships, then 200. Then they stopped counting because the numbers were too big to matter. What mattered was that they were here, and they were asking for surrender. Captain Mira Lee stood beside Jiwoo. Her face calm, even though everyone in the room could feel the fear. She had trained for this moment her entire life, but training and reality were different things. The communication system crackled with the alien message. The voice was cold and mechanical, without any feeling or mercy in it. "People of Earth," the message began, "the Galactic Collective has observed your species for 3,000 years. You have proven yourselves to be primitive and undeveloped. You have two choices. Surrender all your territories beyond the solar system. Destroy all your military vessels. Accept leadership from the Collective, or be erased from existence within 72 hours. The choice is yours, but the choice will be made." Jiwoo did not move. His hands did not shake. He had known this day was coming. Everyone who worked in the Defense Department had known, but knowing something would happen and actually living through it were two different things. The command center was silent except for the beeping of machines. The officers around him looked at each other. Some were afraid. Some were angry. Some seemed frozen, unable to process what they had just heard. One young officer, who could not have been more than 20 years old, started to say something but stopped himself. Mira placed her hand on Jiwoo's shoulder. "What are your orders, sir?" she asked quietly. Jiwoo took a long breath. This was the moment. Every plan they had made, every secret they had kept, every ship they had built in the darkness of space, it all came down to this moment. He turned to face his officers. "Send a reply to the Collective," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Tell them that Earth will not surrender. Tell them we will not kneel. Tell them we will fight." A ripple went through the command center. Some officers looked shocked. Some looked relieved. Some looked like they might be sick, but no one moved to argue with their admiral. This was what they had trained for. This was what they had prepared for, even though they had hoped it would never come. "And send the signal," Jiwoo continued. "Send protocol rebirth to all stations. It is time." Mira's eyes widened slightly. This was the biggest moment in human history. In a few minutes, the entire galaxy would know about Earth's secret. All the hidden shipyards, all the secret military bases, all the advanced weapons they had been building for the past 20 years would be revealed. The signal was sent through the quantum communication network that humans had developed in secret. It reached the asteroid fields where the first group of ships waited. It reached the deep space stations near Jupiter, where more ships floated, hidden, and ready. It reached the colonies on Mars and the Moon, and all the way out to the stations near Saturn. The message was simple: rise or perish. Today, we fight. In the asteroid fields, ships began to move. Their engines, which had been silent for so long, roared to life. The Black Armada was waking up. Jiwoo watched the screens as his fleet began to appear on the sensors. First 10 ships, then 50, then 100. The Collective's computers started sending warnings to their command ship. Something was happening. There were human military vessels everywhere. Where had they come from? How had they hidden such a large force? The answer was in the work of millions of humans over 2 decades. engineers who had sacrificed their careers to work on secret projects, scientists who had given up their lives to develop new technology, soldiers who had trained in hidden locations, never knowing if they would ever be called to fight. And now they were answering the call. The collective's message came again, and this time there was confusion in it. "What is happening? Where are these vessels coming from?" Jiwoo did not bother to reply. Instead, he turned to the weapons officer. "All Black Armada ships, move to attack position. Prepare weapons. We end this threat today, or we end today. There is no middle way." The young officer, who had almost spoken before, started to cry, but he kept doing his job. The soldiers around the room moved with purpose now. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else. It was mixed with purpose and determination, and the knowledge that they were fighting for their home. Mira moved to her station and began coordinating the fleet movements. Dozens of voices came through the communication network. Ship captains reporting ready, weapons officers confirming targeting systems, pilots getting into their fighters. The entire human military was moving as one organism, guided by the intelligence and strategy that Jiwoo had been building for his entire career. The collective fleet began to move as well. Their massive dreadnoughts turned to face the approaching human ships. But they were not afraid. They had conquered 300 star systems. They had never lost a war. They did not believe that primitive humans could hurt them. This was their first mistake. Jiwoo watched the distance between the two fleets decrease on his screen. In a few minutes, the battle would begin. In a few minutes, humans would either prove themselves to the galaxy or they would be destroyed. There was no other option. He thought about all the people on Earth who had no idea what was happening. Families sitting at breakfast, children going to school, workers going to their jobs. None of them knew that their entire world was about to change. In a few minutes, everything would be different. "Admiral," Mira said, "all ships are in position. The collective is raising shields. They are preparing to fire." Jiwoo nodded. He had known this would happen. He had planned for it. He had studied every battle, every strategy, every piece of information they could find about the collective's tactics. And he had built something they had never encountered before, a fleet that was faster, smarter, and more desperate than anything they had faced. "Tell all captains," Jiwoo said, "fire on my command. Fire with everything you have. We did not come this far to lose now. We did not build the Black Armada to surrender. We built it to win, or to die trying." The silence in the command center was absolute. Everyone was waiting. The distance between the two fleets was now so small that both sides could see each other clearly on their screens. The collective's weapons began to charge. Human weapons began to lock on to targets. Then Jiwoo raised his hand and dropped it. "Fire," he said. The vacuum of space lit up with fire. Thousands of missiles and energy weapons streaked across the darkness, creating a wall of light and destruction that looked like a second sun had been born between the two fleets. The collective's dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small city, began to take damage. Some of them erupted into flames. Others started to break apart, their armor too strong to be penetrated easily, but not strong enough to survive when faced with the combined firepower of 247 human ships. In the command center on Earth, every screen showed the battle in perfect detail. Jiwoo Kim watched as his ships moved through space like dancers who had practiced their steps 1,000 times. They were not fighting like humans usually fought. They were fighting like a single creature with many arms, each part knowing what the others would do without having to ask. The first human casualty came within minutes. A destroyer named the Brave Sun took a direct hit from a collective energy weapon. The ship exploded in a silent bloom of fire and metal that scattered debris across several kilometers of space. 1,200 human soldiers died in that explosion. It was fast and clean at least. They would not suffer. Jiwoo did not allow himself to feel anything about that loss. Not yet. Not while the battle was still happening. He would allow himself to feel later, when his people were safe. On the flagship of the Black Armada, the Vengeance, Captain Su Jin Han was coordinating her own group of ships. She was a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to the military. Her father had been a soldier. Her grandfather had been a soldier. And now she was fighting in a war that would determine if humanity would continue to exist or be wiped out from the galaxy forever. The weight of that knowledge was heavy, but she did not let it slow her down. "All ships in formation Delta," she commanded through the communication network. "Move to attack the dreadnought on the left. We will target its reactor core. If we can take it out, the rest of them will be in range for our long-distance weapons." The ships began to move, pulling away from their current positions and forming a new shape. The collective's commanders did not understand this tactic. They were used to fighting enemies who just attacked them head-on, trying to overpower them with force. But humans were doing something different. They were being smart. They were being strategic. They were using their smaller numbers and faster ships to their advantage. In a small fighter craft far away from the main battle, pilot Gina Kim was doing something she had imagined doing since she was a child. She was fighting against an alien force that had tried to conquer her home. Her hands moved across the controls with perfect precision. Years of training made her movements automatic. Her brain was thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating where the enemy fighters would move and placing herself there before they arrived. Another human fighter exploded near her position. She did not allow herself to think about the pilot who had just died. She did not allow herself to think about anyone except the 3 enemy fighters that were now chasing her through a cloud of asteroid debris. She pulled her fighter into a sharp turn that would have killed her if the ship's gravity controls had not adjusted instantly. She fired her weapons backwards, and one of the pursuing fighters took damage. It started to pull away, trailing smoke and fire. 2 enemy fighters left. Gina kept flying, kept thinking, kept fighting. This was what she had trained for. This was her purpose. Dr. Hae-il Park was not in the battle itself, but he was connected to it in every way that mattered. He was the chief engineer of the entire Black Armada, and right now, he was managing the power systems of the flagship Vengeance. The ship was firing weapons at a rate that would have been impossible just a few hours ago. Every second, energy was flowing through cables and circuits, heating up systems and pushing them to the edge of what they could do. If even one major system failed, the ship would lose all power and become a floating target for the collective to destroy. "Reactor 2 is overheating," one of his engineers reported. "Temperature is rising past safe limits." "Divert cooling water from the secondary system," Hae-il said immediately, "and reduce weapons firing from the starboard side until the temperature comes down." These were the kinds of decisions that had to be made 1,000 times during a battle. Small decisions that could save a ship or lose a ship. Lives depended on engineering skill just as much as they depended on combat skill. Hae-il had chosen to become an engineer because he wanted to build things, to create technology that would help people. He had never imagined he would be using that knowledge to keep a warship alive during the most important battle in human history. The collective was beginning to understand that this was not going to be an easy victory. Their ships had been designed to fight other alien species, most of which used tactics that the collective had learned to counter long ago. But humans were different. They were desperate in a way that no other species the collective had ever fought had been. They were fighting for their existence. They had nothing left to lose. Slowly, incredibly, the collective's fleet began to lose ground. Ship after ship was damaged or destroyed. The collective's commanders kept trying to use the same tactics, kept expecting their superiority in technology to overwhelm the humans. But technology was only one part of war. Courage was another part. Intelligence was another part. The will to survive was perhaps the most important part of all. 4 hours into the battle, the first collective dreadnought exploded. This was a ship that had conquered worlds. This was a ship that had killed billions of beings across 1,000 different planets. And it was destroyed by humans who were flying ships that had been built in secret in the asteroid fields and in hidden stations in the outer solar system. When the explosion happened, Captain Soo-Jin Han allowed herself the smallest smile. It was not a smile of victory. It was a smile of hope. They could win this. Humanity could actually win this. But the battle was far from over. The Collective still had more ships than the humans. The Collective's commanders were finally beginning to understand what they were facing, and they were starting to change their tactics. The next phase of the battle would be even harder than the first. Ji-Woo Kim watched everything from his command center on Earth. He could see every ship, every movement, every death. The responsibility was crushing sometimes, but he could not let himself be crushed. His people were dying right now, in this moment, fighting for a chance to continue existing. The least he could do was give them leadership that was worthy of their sacrifice. "Prepare the surprise," he said quietly to Mi-Ra Lee. "It is time to show the Collective that we have learned how to fight." Mi-Ra understood. She sent a signal to a specific location in space, a location where another fleet had been hiding, waiting for this exact moment. A fleet that the Collective did not know about, a fleet that would change everything. The second human fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where they needed to be. 37 ships, all of them carrying the most advanced technology that humanity had managed to create. They had been built by the best engineers in the world, designed by military strategists who had spent decades studying the Collective's weaknesses, and they appeared in the middle of the Collective's formation like a knife thrust into the back of an enemy. The surprise was total and devastating. The Collective's ships had been focused on fighting the main human fleet. Suddenly, they had enemies coming from behind them, ships that were smaller but faster, ships that had weapons they had not anticipated, ships that seemed to know exactly where to aim to cause maximum damage. One of the most dangerous of these new ships was called the Wrathborn, and it was commanded by Captain Ye-Jun Park. He had spent the last 10 years waiting for the chance to test his skills in real combat. 10 years of studying tactics, of practicing strategies, of training his crew to work together like they shared a single mind. That time had finally come. "All weapons, fire on the Collective cruiser at bearing 170, Ye-Jun commanded. "Do not let it escape. This is our moment." His crew responded instantly. They had been training for this too, engineers pushing systems to their limits, weapons officers calculating angles and distances, targeting specialists locking onto the enemy ship. The Wrathborn's weapons erupted, sending hundreds of missiles toward the target. The Collective cruiser tried to run, but Ye-Jun anticipated its escape route. He had studied these ships. He knew how they moved, how they thought, how they would try to survive. The Collective cruiser was destroyed. It simply came apart in the vacuum of space, breaking into pieces that glowed with heat and trailing fire. When Ye-Jun saw this happen, he felt something inside him. It was not happiness. It was not sadness. It was the feeling of having completed a task that he had trained for his entire life. The battle was changing. The Collective had been confident before. They had been expecting a quick and easy victory. But now they were faced with something they did not understand. They were facing humans who were united, who were determined, who would rather die than submit to their command. In a different part of the battle, something even more dangerous was happening. A team of human soldiers was boarding a Collective warship. Lieutenant Commander Hye-Jin Kang was leading the team. She was young, only 35 years old, but she had been training for special operations since she was 17. Every jump, every turn, every movement through the corridors of the captured ship was something she had practiced 1,000 times. "Move fast and quiet," she whispered to her team. "The target is 6 levels up. We plant the charges on the main reactor and we get out. No noise, no fights if we can help it." The soldiers moved like ghosts through the alien corridors. The collective had not expected anyone to board their ships. The collective had weapons in space. The collective had armor and shields, but they had not prepared for combat in the tight spaces of their own ships. Hyojin and her team made it to the reactor chamber. The locks were different from what they expected, but human soldiers had been trained to break into alien systems. They had studied everything they could find, had built models, had practiced on captured collective technology. It took them less than 2 minutes to get through the door. The reactor was huge, a massive structure that stretched from floor to ceiling. The charges they had brought were small but powerful, military-grade explosives that could destroy something this size from the inside. Hyojin placed the charges in the exact locations her engineers had told her to place them. Then she set the timer. "Go, go, go," she said, and the team moved back through the corridors faster than they had come in. Behind them, alarms began to sound. The collective had finally realized what was happening. But it was too late. Hyojin and her team made it to the extraction point with only seconds to spare. The detonation charges they had left behind exploded in sequence, destroying the reactor from the inside. The collective warship lost all power, its shields went dark, its weapons went silent. And then the human fleet outside opened fire on it, and the ship was destroyed in a series of explosions that lit up the space around it. Back on Earth, Ji-Woo Kim was monitoring all of this. He was receiving constant updates about the battle. He was hearing about ships destroyed and soldiers dying and victories being won. But he was also seeing the bigger picture. He was seeing that the collective was beginning to retreat. It was not a panic-stricken retreat. The collective was still a powerful force, still dangerous, still capable of killing humans by the thousands. But they were leaving. They were pulling their ships back, reforming their lines, preparing to leave this system. "They are breaking," Mira said, and she was right. The collective had lost too many ships. They had lost the surprise. They had lost their belief that this would be an easy conquest. But Ji-Woo knew that this was not over. The collective would return with a larger force. This was just the first battle in a war that would last for years, perhaps for decades. Humanity had proved that they could fight. Humanity had proved that they could hurt the galaxy's greatest military power. But there was still so much more to come. All across human space, people were watching the battle. On Mars, on the Moon, on colonies and stations scattered through the solar system. They were watching their defenders fight against the collective. They were watching and hoping and praying that humanity would survive. And in that moment, as the collective began to retreat, they started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would survive. Maybe they would not have to kneel. Maybe they would not have to surrender their freedom. The Black Armada had proven itself worthy. The Black Armada had responded to the galaxy's command with fire and determination and the will to survive. But the cost had been high. Thousands of humans had died in the last 6 hours. Dozens of ships had been destroyed. Entire families had lost fathers and mothers and sons and daughters. The victory was real, but it was a victory paid for in blood and sacrifice and the lives of humans who had believed in something worth dying for. Ji-Woo knew that the hard part was just beginning. The hard part was not the fighting. The hard part was going to be dealing with what came after. The hard part was going to be healing the wounds, both the wounds to ships and the wounds to the human soul. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, humanity had stood against the darkness and had not been defeated. Today, humanity had chosen to fight instead of kneel. And that had made all the difference. The collective's flagship was called the Throne of Dominion. It was the largest ship in their fleet, a weapon of war that had been created to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. It was the home of Supreme Hierarch Zixthar, the commander of all collective forces in this sector of space. For the past 6 hours, Zixthar had been receiving reports of something that should have been impossible. He was losing. In all of Zixthar's 300 years of life, he had never lost a battle. He had never even come close to losing a battle. The collective had conquered 300 star systems with this same strategy. They would arrive with a superior force. They would demand surrender. The enemy would recognize the futility of resistance and would submit. It had always worked. It had worked every single time. Until today. Until they had encountered humans. Zixthar was not a being who was capable of fear, but something similar was happening in his mind. His calculations were showing him that at the current rate of losses, his fleet would be reduced to below combat effectiveness within 8 hours. That had never happened before. Ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Soldiers were dying without accomplishing their objectives. "What is the status of the human flagship?" Zixthar demanded. "The vessel is still in combat," his tactical officer reported. "They are moving toward our position. Current trajectory suggests they will attempt to engage our flagship directly within the hour." This was the level of disrespect that Zixthar was now forced to endure. A human ship, piloted by humans who had been in space for less than 1,000 years, was approaching his flagship directly. It was as if a human was walking toward a god and raising their hand to fight. But Zixthar was beginning to understand that these humans were not intimidated by him. These humans were not impressed by his power or his history or his reputation. These humans simply wanted him to go away or die trying. On the Vengeance, Captain Sujin Han was receiving updates about the collective's movements. The flagship was moving to intercept her. This was what she had hoped for. This was what all the training had been leading toward. "All crew, this is Captain Han," she said over the communication system. "We are about to engage the enemy flagship. This is going to be difficult. Many of us may not survive this encounter. But if we win this battle, we save billions of lives. We save Earth. We save everything that we have ever known. This is worth the risk. This is worth the sacrifice." Her crew responded with cheers. These were soldiers who had trained for this their entire lives. These were people who had made the decision to be willing to die for something greater than themselves. And now that moment had come. The distance between the two flagships closed rapidly. Sujin could see the throne of dominion on her screens. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Vengeance. Its armor was thick, its weapons were powerful. By every measure of military power, it was more formidable than her ship. But power was not the only thing that mattered in war. "All weapons, open fire," Sujin commanded. "Target their reactor section. That is where their weakness is. That is what we have prepared for." The Vengeance unleashed everything it had at the throne of dominion. Missiles and energy weapons streaked across space. Some of them hit shields. Some of them struck armor. A few of them found their way through to the actual hull of the ship. The throne of dominion was damaged, but it was far from destroyed. Then the throne of dominion opened fire on the Vengeance. The impact was devastating. The Vengeance's shields flared. Sections of the ship's armor were torn away. Internal explosions echoed through the corridors. People screamed over the communication system. Parts of the ship were venting atmosphere into space. Dr. Hay-Il Park gripped the edge of his console. The ship was taking damage that was almost beyond repair. He was running calculations, trying to figure out what systems had been destroyed and what systems might still be saved. "We have lost shields on the starboard side," one of his engineers reported, panic in their voice. "Divert power from the weapons system," Hay-Il commanded. "Get shields back online or we are going to lose the ship." But Hay-Il knew that if they diverted power from weapons, they would not be able to fire as effectively. It was a choice between staying alive and fighting. For a moment, he felt paralyzed. Then he realized that these two things were not actually separate. If they could not fight, staying alive meant nothing. Earth would still be conquered. Humanity would still be forced to kneel. "Redirect the power," he said, "but only for 30 seconds. then we are firing every weapon we have. If we are going to die, we are going to take that ship with us." The shields came back online. The Vengeance was still under fire, still being battered by the weapons of the Throne of Dominion. But now the Vengeance was ready to fire everything it had. Captain Su Jin had been waiting for this moment. She had studied the internal structure of a collective flagship. She knew where the reactors were. She knew that if she could damage them in a specific sequence, the entire ship could be destroyed from the inside out. "Weapons officer, fire all remaining missiles. Target the reactor section. This is it. This is our last shot," she said. The weapons officer, a young woman named Hai-Il Park's cousin, did not hesitate. She released every missile that the Vengeance had left, hundreds of them. Some of them were shot down by collective defenses, but many of them got through. They struck the Throne of Dominion at the exact spot that Su Jin had calculated. The internal explosions tore through the ship, destroying the reactor from the inside. The massive flagship began to lose power. Its shields failed. Its weapons went silent. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the Throne of Dominion began to break apart. Pieces of the massive ship started to drift away into space. The flagship of the collective commander was being destroyed. On the Throne of Dominion, Zixthar felt the moment when everything changed. He felt the ship shudder. He felt the power fail. He understood in that instant what was happening. He was dying, and he was dying because of a species that the collective had considered to be primitive. It was the last thought he ever had. The explosion was massive. The Throne of Dominion, one of the greatest weapons of war that the Galactic Collective had ever created, was destroyed. And with it, the entire command structure of the collective fleet was destroyed. Without leadership, the collective ships began to panic. They began to retreat. They began to run. The Black Armada pursued them, firing relentlessly. But Ji-Woo Kim made a decision. He did not order the pursuit to continue. He ordered his fleet to hold position. "Let them run," he said to Mira Lee. "We have won the day. That is enough." Mira understood. They had paid a terrible price for this victory. Continuing to fight would only cost more lives. And they had proven their point. Humanity would not kneel. Humanity could fight. Humanity could win. The collective fleet jumped into hyperspace and disappeared. The battle was over. Against all odds, against every expectation, humanity had won. The silence that followed the collective's retreat was perhaps the loudest silence that humanity had ever known. For hours after the battle ended, no one spoke. People just moved through the command centers and the hospitals and the streets of every human settlement in a state of shock. They had believed that they would lose. They had prepared themselves for death, but they had survived. On the Vengeance, Captain Su Jin Han stood on the bridge and looked at the destruction around her. Her ship had taken terrible damage. Whole sections were offline. There were fires in some of the corridors. The air tasted like smoke and burning metal. Around her, the surviving crew members were performing damage control, trying to save what was left of their vessel. The casualty reports were starting to come in. 40,000 human soldiers and crew members had died during the battle. 40,000 people who would never go home. 40,000 families who would wake up in the days ahead and realize that their loved ones were not coming back. Dr. Hai-Il Park sat at his console and cried. He had done everything right. His engineering team had kept the Vengeance alive when she should have been destroyed. They had managed the power systems perfectly, getting every last bit of performance out of their ship. But that did not matter. The cost had been too high. Captain Yejun Park was receiving messages from the colony worlds. On Earth, on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter. People were celebrating. They were cheering. They were grateful for their victory. But Yejun could not celebrate. He could only think about the 40,000 who had not made it back. In the command center on Earth, Admiral Ji-Woo Kim was facing a different kind of struggle. Now that the battle was over, He had to deal with the political consequences of his actions. He had started a war without permission from the civilian government. He had activated a secret military program that had cost hundreds of billions of credits. He had put all of humanity at risk based on his belief that they could win, and he had been right. But that did not necessarily make what he had done acceptable to the people who governed the planet. Minister Ji-won Park called him within hours of the battle ending. Ji-won was the head of Earth's governing council. She had known about the Black Armada in secret, but she had never expected Ji-woo to use it. "You started a war without authorization," Ji-won said, her voice tight with control. "The collective gave us an ultimatum," Ji-woo replied. "Surrender or die. There were only two choices." "There was another choice," Ji-won said. "We could have negotiated. We could have tried to find a peaceful solution." "You do not negotiate with an enemy that wants you dead," Ji-woo said. "You do not negotiate with an enemy that has already decided your fate. The collective came to conquer us, not to talk to us. The only language they understand is force." Ji-won was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "You were right," she said, and the admission seemed to cost her something. "You were right, and 40,000 people are dead because you were right. That is a difficult truth to accept." Ji-woo understood. Ji-woo had known that this would be the consequence of his choice. He had decided that it was worth it, but knowing that did not make it easier to live with. The memorial services began 3 days after the battle ended. On every human world, in every colony and station and settlement, people gathered to mourn the dead. They held ceremonies. They spoke the names of those who had been lost. They tried to find meaning in the sacrifice. Young pilot Gina Kim attended the memorial service for her squadron. 8 pilots in her unit had died during the battle. 8 people who had been her friends, who had trained with her, who had joked with her during the pre-flight briefings. When the commander read out their names, Gina felt something break inside her. The tears came then, tears that she had not allowed herself to cry during the battle. She had been a soldier then. She had to be strong then. But now, she could cry. After the ceremony, she sat alone in a flight simulator and ran through combat exercises. She was not grieving. She was remembering. She was honoring the pilots who had died by making sure that their sacrifice meant something. If the collective came back, she would be ready. And if they came back, she would fight them with the same determination that her fallen friends had shown. Hye-jin Kang was meeting with her team. The Special Operations Unit that had boarded the collective ship had lost half its members. 12 soldiers had not made it off the ship before the explosions. They had died in the vacuum of space or in the corridors of an alien vessel far from home. They died for something important, Hye-jin told her remaining team members. They died so that Earth would be free. That matters. It will always matter. The soldiers nodded. They understood. They had made the choice to be willing to die for something greater than themselves. Some of them had paid that price, but they had also changed the course of history. Soo-jin Han was promoted to admiral. Ji-woo Kim recommended her personally, despite the political complications. She deserved the rank. She had proven herself in the most difficult circumstances possible. When Soo-jin received the notification of her promotion, she asked for one thing: the opportunity to build more ships, better ships, faster ships, ships that could protect Earth if the collective came back. She was given what she asked for. The entire human civilization shifted into military mode. Schools that had taught other subjects now taught military science. Factories that had built consumer goods now built weapons. The entire culture of humanity began to change, becoming focused on one goal: survival. But there was another change happening as well, a change in how humanity saw itself. For thousands of years, humans had been divided by borders and nations and ideologies. But now, faced with a common enemy, humanity was learning to unite. Ji-won Park called Ji-woo to her office 3 weeks after the battle. I am resigning as head of the council, she said. I am recommending that you take my position. You are the one who should be leading humanity now. You are the one that humanity trusts. Ji-woo wanted to refuse. He wanted to go back to being a military officer. But he understood that the galaxy did not care what he wanted. Humanity needed leadership. And for better or worse, he was the leader that people would follow. I will do it, he said, but only if the government agrees to a new structure. We need civilian leadership, but we also need military advisors. We need a government that understands that we are at war now. Not a war that might come in the future, but a war that has already begun. Ji-won nodded. She had expected this answer. The new government was formed within a week. Admiral Ji-woo Kim became the head of Earth's defense and foreign policy. Minister Ji-won Park remained on the council, but in a more limited role. A new military command structure was created, with Soo Jin-han leading fleet construction and development. And across human space, preparations began for the next battle, because everyone understood the truth that Ji-woo had understood all along. The collective would return. They would come back with a larger force. And when they did, humanity would have to be ready.